Oh, the 90s. From boy bands to frosted tips, the 1990s seemed to have it all. Some of the clothing from the 1970s made a minor comeback, while other styles such as straight-leg jeans were all the rage. This was a decade where you could still get a nice hotel for $20, and some cars could be filled up for less than $15. Computers were really starting to come on strong thanks to the Windows operating system and the World Wide Web. However, the 1990s is also full of things that are now outdated. In this video, we will take a look back at some of the 90s things that we'll never do again. If you were a young woman or a teen girl in the 1990s, then there's a good chance that you had your picture taken at Glamour Shots. This company began in 1988, but it really took off in the 1990s and it peaked in 1995. Hordes of women throughout the decade walked in, had their makeup done, picked out a few outfits, and then were made to feel and look like a model. These photos may look funny now, but at the time they were highly desired, and it was the only way that you could get your grandma to replace those hideous Sears photos that she had hanging on her walls since the 1970s and 80s. Speaking of photos, people in the 90s still use film in their cameras, and the 35mm camera was the one that most people preferred. This meant that you had to load the roll of film yourself and then have it developed afterwards. Rolls of film came in 12, 24, and 36 exposures, but you were lucky to get that many without a thumb, fingers, or camera straps in the way. Of course, you wouldn't even know that until you had your photos developed, and by that time you probably forgot what you had taken anyways. By the time the 90s rolled around, there were blockbuster videos in just about every major city. If you didn't have that, then you certainly had some sort of mom-and-pop video store. These were places that we spent hours in looking for that next great movie on VHS and even DVD in the last couple years of the decade. None of us could ever imagine a world without these rental stores, but today streaming services have pretty well taken over. Even though we had VCRs and could record our favorite shows, many of us still adjusted our routines around a favorite television show. This was important because everyone would be talking about the show the next day. Very few people tune into the exact same show at the exact same time anymore. And what about getting up during the commercials of a television show and racing to the bathroom and back before the show starts again? This was like competing in our own Olympic event. The 1990s also saw an increase in answering machines, and just about every household had one. These were the kind that required a cassette tape in them, and many of us spent way too much time trying to perfect our greeting. And since we mentioned cassette tapes, let's talk about those for a second. The 1990s is when most people migrated over to CDs in order to listen to their favorite music. But the cassette tapes were still used for making mixtapes. If you made a mixtape for a significant other, then it showed how much you really cared for them. These took time to make, and a whole lot of thought went into them. By the late 90s, CDs started to get replaced by file-sharing websites such as Napster. Today, most people use some sort of streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music. The days of carrying around huge cases of new music on CDs are long gone. Remember using a payphone to make a call? This, of course, was popular long before cell phones became so prevalent. In the 1990s, you could call someone locally for just a quarter and talk with them for hours. Today, payphones are hard to find, and if you do see one, then it probably won't even work. Payphones were one of the reasons why it was important to memorize numbers and keep a couple of quarters handy just in case there was an emergency. Phone books were another important item to have. Kids today don't have a clue when it comes to the difference between yellow pages and white pages. The year 2000 problem, or more commonly known as the Y2K scare, was a real concern for many people in the 90s. There were many computer programs that represented the 4-digit years with only the last 2 digits, making the year 2000 indistinguishable from 1900. The fear at that time was that the world was going to shut down and then all chaos would then break out. This fear led to many people stocking up on things that they would not have otherwise. When 2000 rolled around, we were all relieved that the world did not end. Since we mentioned computers, how about the old dial-up internet? It took a while to get online, but who could ever forget that annoying sound? But for those of us who got online at that time, it was exciting, and when we hear that noise today, it brings back memories of how it used to be. Kids today wouldn't have the patience for that, and they seem to freak out when the Wi-Fi goes down, even for just a little bit. Back then, we only freaked out when we were kicked offline because someone picked up the phone line. Then we would have to go back through the whole process of getting online. Floppy disks are something else that has become irrelevant. Eventually, we moved from those to CDs, and then CDs to thumb drives. Then we went from thumb drives to external drives or the cloud. The computers that are new on the market today don't even have a way of using these old floppy disks and CDs. In order to view what was on those, you would have to have something extra hooked up. Man, and we thought those would last forever. In the 90s, you could serve a meal without 63.7% of the guests being vegan, fruitarian, lactose intolerant, gluten intolerant, low fat, or various other allergies. Don't ask me where I got that statistic from because I made it up. The point is, we never ran into these people like we do today. Even though the internet was coming on strong in the 90s, it was still in its infancy. Information was somewhat limited and there was an abundance of chat rooms. We could not apply for jobs online like we can today. You still did this in person and you spoke to the manager or boss face to face. Now you can even text to get an application at some places. One thing that became super crazy in the 90s were the Beanie Babies. Some were supposedly really rare and worth thousands of dollars. There were tons of chat rooms online built around collecting these rare Beanie Babies, and it may be the first case of bad information on the internet. If you see these at a garage sale, people can't even hardly sell them. They almost have to give them away unless someone remembers having some and they want them back. Long before we had GPS in our car or on our phones, we actually had to use a paper map. If you were going on a long trip, then you could have multiple maps that you had to keep in your glove box. Reading a map was a skill all of its own, but so was folding the darn thing without ripping it. A lot of us grew up using the food pyramid, and we believed that this was the healthiest model that we should live by. This model was replaced by the My Plate model in 2011, so it is probably something that you won't ever use again. In the 90s, starter jackets became really huge. Everyone wanted one. In fact, some kids were even getting mugged for their starter jackets. Over time, these became less popular, and who knew that we would ever see the starter brand at Walmart later down the road? When Zema hit the market in 1993, it was marketed as an alternative to beer. It was aimed at both men and women, but it soon became the drink of choice for women. The production of Zema in the US ceased in 2008, but it had a limited release in the summer of 2017 and the summer of 2018. As it stands now, it may be gone for good, unless you're in Japan. One of the biggest styles of shirts in the decade came from Janera. These hypercolor shirts were first produced and sold in 1991. They came in an assortment of colors which would change colors when they came in contact with body heat. It was a cool effect, but it could be permanently damaged when it was washed in hot water, tumble-dried, or ironed. By 1995, the Janera company was facing bankruptcy and it was eventually acquired by the Public Clothing Company in 2002. Since that time, several companies have tried to revive this heat-activated technology in clothing, but they have had little success. The 1990s was certainly a much different decade than what we see today. Some may argue that this was the last great decade before things changed in the new millennium. Back then, only weirdos thought that the government was watching us, and today, only weirdos think that the government is not watching us. Times have certainly changed, but we can always go back and remember how things used to be. Do you have any special memories from the 90s? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching.